Hi there. My name's Emily Morgan, and I never thought I'd be telling this story out loud. But here goes. At my own family's baby shower, yes, for my baby, they laughed. Not about the decorations or some cheesy game, but about me, about the fact that I wasn't married. I smiled through it like I always do. But inside, something cracked. Because this wasn't just a joke, it was a reminder that no matter what I built, no matter who I became, I was still the family's shame. If you've ever swallowed your pride just to keep the peace, then maybe you'll understand what happened next. The invitation arrived in a pale pink envelope, Rachel's handwriting so perfect it made my stomach twist. The ink looped with practiced elegance, no hesitation, not even in the way she curled the Y in Emily. I stared at it for a full minute before slicing it open with a nail file as if bracing for a paper cut that never came. Inside was a single card, white embossed soft as pressed linen. You are cordially invited to a baby shower honoring Rachel Morgan Reed, Saturday, November 11th at the Willow Creek Grange Hall, hosted by Margaret Morgan. The words blurred slightly, not from tears. I wasn't crying, but because the room had suddenly grown very, very still. Rain tapped against the windows, rhythmic and persistent, like someone trying to remind me of something I'd forgotten on purpose. A soft amber glow from the kitchen lamp cast long shadows across the invitation, and for a second I thought about tossing it straight into the recycling bin. But of course I didn't. I held it, weighed it in my hand like it might tip the scales of something far bigger than an RSVP. 5 years ago, I left Willow Creek behind. I never thought I'd have to come back, unless it was for a funeral or this. My phone buzzed. Rachel. Of course. I let it go to voicemail. Then I picked it up again and called her back against every bone in my spine, begging me not to. She answered on the second ring. Emily, you got it. Her voice still had that bright trill like a songbird who'd never flown into a window in her life. I did, I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. There was a pause. Then, it would mean a lot if you came. Just be discreet. I swallowed hard. Discreet. You know how Mom is. Yes, I said. I do. I didn't say I know how she ignored every letter I wrote her after Sophie was born. I know how she sent Christmas cards with your family's photo, but never asked to see mine. I didn't say any of that. Not yet. I'll think about it, I said instead. Rachel's relief was almost audible, like she'd already counted my attendance as part of her perfect plan. When I hung up, the apartment seemed smaller, more temporary. I walked to the kitchen, opened the cabinet above the fridge, and reached for a file folder I hadn't touched in 2 years. Inside were 5 letters, all addressed to my mother. None of them had ever been answered. One still had a child's crayon drawing folded inside it, Sophie's first attempt at writing her name. The S looked like a snake in a windstorm. I stared at it longer than I should have, then tucked the folder into the bottom of my duffel bag. If I was going to step back into that town, I wasn't going unarmed. Later that night, Daniel came home. He was soaked from walking home in the rain because the L had stalled again near Addison. His jacket was plastered to his shoulders, hair dripping, but he still smiled when he saw me on the couch. You look like someone just read their high school yearbook backwards, he said, toeing off his wet shoes. I didn't laugh. I held up the invitation instead. He sat next to me, peeling off his damp hoodie. You going? I don't know. Maybe. I should. You don't owe them anything, Em. I nodded slowly. But if I don't go now, will I ever stop wondering? He reached over and touched my stomach just barely. The gesture was quiet, respectful. We hadn't told anyone yet, not even Sophie. You don't have to tell them this time either, he said. Not unless you want to. I looked over at him. I don't know what I want. That's okay, he said gently, but I'll support whatever you decide. Just don't go for them. Go for you. The next morning I told Sophie we were going on a little trip. She was thrilled at the idea of trains and grandma stories, unaware that the grandma part might be purely theoretical. By the time we got to Union Station, she was already nodding off in her car seat. I carried her through the crowd, one hand gripping the duffel bag, the other wrapped around her small sleeping frame. My back ached. My resolve ached worse. We boarded the 8:15 to Willow Creek, the town I'd tried so hard to forget, the family who'd tried even harder to forget me. I settled into a window seat and watched Chicago recede in blur and brick. I wasn't going back for reconciliation. I wasn't going back for forgiveness. I was going back because something inside me had started to rot, and I needed to see how deep it went. I would only reveal the truth when it mattered. What could possibly go wrong at a baby shower? I argued. The silence answered. The town hadn't changed, which meant neither had the people. The train pulled into Willow Creek just after 6, the last light of the day slipping behind the ridge like it couldn't bear to watch me step off. The platform smelled like damp leaves and diesel. Sophie clutched my hand as we walked toward the parking lot, her pink coat flaring behind her like a cape. She asked if this was where Grandma lived. I said yes, but she didn't press further. Maybe she sensed what I didn't say. Rachel met us at the curb in her Lexus. She stepped out all shine and perfume, not a strand of hair out of place, despite the wind that kept tugging at mine. "You made it," she chirped, arms extended, though she only half hugged me before kneeling to Sophie's level. "And this must be our little guest of honor." Sophie blinked. "Hi." Rachel smiled too brightly. "You've gotten so big I didn't correct her." She'd never met Sophie before. The drive up Magnolia was slow, deliberate. Rachel narrated every storefront like I was a tourist. "They redid the bakery last spring. Oh, and the coffee shop now has kombucha on tap." She laughed at her own enthusiasm. Small town revolution, but as we passed the old Presbyterian church and the shuttered bookstore I used to love, I felt like I was watching a parade of ghosts. Not one of them waved. The Morgan house loomed at the end of the street, white trimmed and navy porch lights glowing. Too perfect, too controlled. It looked like a postcard that would yell at you for not using coasters. Rachel helped with the bags while I got Sophie out of the car. The wind whipped around us, lifting the hem of my coat and making Sophie squeal. "It's cold," I carried her up the porch steps. The door opened before I could knock. My mother stood in the doorway in a taupe sweater set and lipstick too bright for evening. Her eyes swept over me, then stopped on Sophie. "And this must be your friend?" My jaw clenched. "This is Sophie, my daughter." There was a long pause. "Right," Maggie said, stepping aside. "Well, come in." The warmth inside the house didn't reach my skin. It smelled like cinnamon candles and lemon cleaner. Too much of both. Rachel took us straight into the dining room, which had been transformed into a baby shower explosion. Pink and gold balloons floated above a table set with name cards. Sugar cookies shaped like rattles, and tiny jars of homemade jam with baby Reed stickers. It was aggressively cheerful. "We're doing a brunch buffet," Rachel said, gesturing, "and a memory table here. Guests will write blessings. Super intimate. You know." I nodded, pretending to listen. Then I caught it. The family wall photos from vacations, weddings, milestones. A grid of smiles and good lighting. My senior photo was gone. So was the one of me holding Sophie at the hospital. All that remained were images of Rachel and Brad Maggie in group shots and framed calligraphy that read things like, "Family is everything." My stomach twisted. "Where's the photo of Dad and me at my graduation?" I asked. Rachel blinked. "Oh, I think Mom's rotating some pictures out, Lies. Smooth practiced." We moved toward the kitchen where Aunt Helen stood stirring tea. Her cardigan hung loosely on her small frame, but her eyes were sharp. When she saw me, she smiled, real crinkling at the corners. "Well," she said softly, "you look strong, stronger than before." She didn't hug me either, but she pressed a warm mug into my hands like a secret. Maggie reappeared from the hallway. "Guest room's upstairs. Sheets are clean. Please try not to make the weekend about you, Emily." The words hit like a slap wrapped in linen. Sophie was coloring quietly at the table, unaware. "I wasn't planning to," I replied, my voice low even. "But maybe I should have. I never knew cupcakes could taste like humiliation." But there I was, chewing vanilla resentment. The frosting stuck to the roof of my mouth, sugary and dense like an apology that never arrived. Around me, the room glittered in pastels and Pinterest perfection pink streamers draped like spider silk from the ceiling beams. Faux chalkboard signs proclaimed bundle of joy and sugar and spice, and a white acoustic guitarist in the corner strummed a sanitized version of Isn't She Lovely? I stood near the mimosa station sipping orange juice from a plastic flute because no one had offered champagne and because, well, Rachel knew I couldn't drink. The chairs were arranged in a semicircle facing a throne of ruffled cushions, where Rachel now perched like a crowned duchess. She wore a rose-colored maternity dress that hugged her belly in all the right places, her hands resting gently atop the bump as if cupping the future. Brad hovered nearby, tossing out polite laughter like confetti. My mother bustled from table to table, adjusting napkins with military precision. I tried not to hover. Sophie sat beside me, drawing on a folded place card with a pink marker, her tongue poking out slightly in concentration. Her little legs swung under the chair. A distant cousin, whose name I could never remember, handed me a baby food jar. "Wanna play?" she asked too brightly. "We're guessing the flavors. It's hilarious." I held the jar up to the light. It looked like someone had pureed despair and dyed it peach. "I'll pass," I said, forcing a smile. The laughter erupted midway through the game. I had turned away to help Sophie unscrew the cap of her juice box when I heard it. "At least I got married first." Right, sis Rachel's voice, just loud enough to carry, followed by a ripple of chuckles. Even Brad smiled but quickly looked away. I looked up. Everyone else already had. I smiled back, tightly. My fingers curled around the edge of the tablecloth, pressing into the plastic. Nobody said anything else. Nobody had to. The room had spoken. I crouched beside Sophie. "How's your drawing?" She beamed. "Wanna see?" She turned it toward me, a crude but earnest portrait, 4 stick figures holding hands under a sun that wore sunglasses. "This is mommy-daddy me. And baby." My breath caught. Before I could react, Rachel appeared over my shoulder. Her smile faltered when she saw the paper. "Oh," she said. "That's creative." Sophie looked up. "It's our family." I saw Rachel's eyes flick to my belly. I shifted instinctively just enough to block her view. Maggie appeared then as if summoned by radar. She knelt smoothly, too smoothly, and plucked the drawing from Sophie's hands. "That's lovely, dear," she said, folding it once, twice, then tucking it into her purse. "Hey," I said softly. "She worked hard on that." Maggie's smile didn't reach her eyes. Of course she did. Sophie's brow furrowed, but she said nothing. She went back to her juice. Later, when most guests had migrated to the buffet or were trapped in polite conversation, I wandered over to the gift table. A sea of pastel bags, tissue paper, and boxes towered on every surface. Names were written in silver pen on tags shaped like rattles and baby bottles. And there, in the center, nestled between a teddy bear and a bottle sterilizer, was a framed photo. It was my wedding photo. Not Rachel's. Not a generic print. Mine. Me and Daniel standing on a windy hill in Vermont laughing at something the photographer had said. My veil had flown sideways like a flag, and Daniel had reached out instinctively to catch it, grinning like a man who still believed in miracles. It was unmistakably our picture. But it wasn't signed. It didn't have a card. It was simply there. My fingers touched the edge of the frame. It was slightly warm, as if recently handled. I looked up. Rachel stood 5 feet away, sipping punch and laughing with a neighbor. She glanced at me. I held up the photo. She blinked. Just once. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "You put that there. Or were you hoping someone else would see it first? I thought I was being erased." Turns out I was just being shelved. The house was quieter than it had been all morning. Laughter and clinking forks drifted faintly from the backyard where Rachel was hosting the garden games portion of her shower. Maggie had asked me assigned me to hang up some tissue paper garlands in the foyer while she managed the women outside. It was a task too simple to refuse, too pointed to ignore. Sophie napped upstairs, curled around her stuffed elephant. So I was alone. My hands paused near the end of the garland string. One of the thumbtacks had slipped and rolled beneath the hallway cabinet. I knelt to retrieve it, and as I did, my eyes flicked toward the edge of Maggie's study door. Slightly ajar, not locked. A breath caught in my throat before I even stood. I didn't plan to go in. Not really. But the door creaked open easily as if it had been waiting. Inside, the air felt different, cooler, heavier. The blinds were mostly drawn, casting dusty light across the floral carpet. The room was orderly to the point of suffocation, a place where nothing moved unless Maggie allowed it. My gaze landed on the cherry wood desk. Drawers, of course. I approached like someone stealing back a piece of herself. The middle drawer resisted slightly before sliding open. Pen spills, a pair of reading glasses. Nothing. The side drawer. A soft thunk, then a shift. Something inside. I reached in and pulled out a thick bundle tied with twine. Letters. My letters. My handwriting on the front of each envelope addressed to Mom or Mom and Dad in neat, hopeful script. Some were bent, others pristine. None had been opened. I stared at them, my pulse roaring in my ears. One had a sticker I remembered Sophie choosing, a pink unicorn with glitter horns. She had kissed the envelope before we mailed it. "Send love to Grandma," she'd whispered. I sank into the desk chair, the bundle heavy in my lap. My thumb traced the edges. The ink had faded slightly on the older ones. Underneath, a thick album caught my eye. A baby book. The cover was pale yellow, embroidered with ducks. I opened it. The first few pages were filled out in Maggie's neat cursive. Baby's first ultrasound. Weight at birth. All Rachel. But halfway through, a different entry caught my breath. A page titled, "The Grandchild Journal." Sophie's name had been written in soft pencil, then hastily scratched out. In its place, nothing. I closed the book too fast. My chest ached. Behind me, the floor creaked. I turned. Aunt Helen stood in the doorway, her eyes wide, her lips parted in a whisper. "I wanted to tell you," she said. "Your mother wouldn't let me." She stepped into the room, her face, pale eyes glossed with something between regret and resignation. "She got them," I said, voice raw. "All of them. Every letter. Every drawing. And she chose not to read them." Helen didn't argue. So it wasn't that she didn't know. I held up the bundle. It was that she chose not to. Helen swallowed. "Emily, I looked up, fury and heartbreak threading my voice. She kept this entire part of my life in a drawer, like clutter." Helen knelt beside me slowly. Her fingers brushed one of the envelopes, then curled away. "And that wasn't the only thing she kept from you. There's something cruel about people calling you strong when they're the ones who made you that way." The baby shower dinner looked more like a wedding reception than anything welcoming. Rows of long tables covered in lace runners and flickering candles snaked across the community center's main hall. Rose gold cutlery, cloth napkins, personalized menus that read, "A Little Reed is Blooming" in cursive font. It was the kind of curated warmth that chilled me. Rachel floated from table to table in a cream silk dress, her perfectly rounded belly making her the natural center of gravity. Brad trailed her like a well-trained shadow, shaking hands and beaming. Maggie didn't smile, Maggie managed. She nodded. She curated her facial expressions like someone arranging china behind glass. I kept to the fringes, Sophie at my side. Her hand was sticky with frosting, and she clutched my fingers like a lifeline as guests passed and patted her head like a novelty. "She looks just like her father," someone said. I smiled vaguely. No one asked his name. Daniel called as I stood near the buffet. The phone buzzed in my palm, his name lighting up the screen like a secret only I was allowed to have. "You okay?" he asked, voice low calm. I exhaled through my nose. "Define okay." He chuckled gently. "I told you, you don't need their approval." I turned away from the chatter and noise. "I know, but that doesn't mean it doesn't sting." There was a pause. "You sure you want to do it tonight?" I glanced down at the box beside me. Plain wrapping, no label, perfectly ordinary. "Yeah," I said. "It's time." I hung up and tucked the phone away. The gift opening ceremony began with a speech, of course. Rachel stood at the head of the room, hands delicately folded over her belly, thanking everyone who's helped us build this dream. Maggie sat beside her like a throne advisor, silent approval carved into her expression. Boxes opened, tissue paper flew, applause and laughter. matching onesies, teething rings, handcrafted blankets. Each gift a new brick in Rachel's pedestal. And then it was my turn. Rachel's eyes flicked to the box. No name. Her manicured fingers hesitated. "Oh," she said, smiling tight. "Mystery gift." She peeled the tape, opened the lid. Silence cracked the room like a dropped plate. Inside was a single photo frame. It wasn't antique. It wasn't engraved. Just simple black wood around a moment most of them had never seen. Me, Daniel, Sophie. Our wedding day. Sophie stood in front of flower crowns sliding over her brow. I was mid-laugh, leaning into Daniel as he kissed the top of her head. Our hands linked at her shoulders. We looked whole. Gasps scattered like popcorn. One cousin dropped her fork. Rachel didn't lift the photo. She just stared. Beside her, Maggie's face turned to stone. No outburst. No demand. Just clenched silence so tight it could shatter. From beside me, Sophie grinned and clapped. "That's Daddy," she shouted, her voice bright, innocent, loud enough to echo. Brad cleared his throat. Maggie didn't move. I took a step forward. Thought it was time someone remembered what I wasn't supposed to forget. Rachel's knuckles whitened around the tissue paper. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered, not looking at me. I smiled. "That's the first honest thing you've said. People think secrets live in diaries. But sometimes they sit quietly, in storage boxes waiting to explode." The attic groaned as I stepped onto the creaking floorboards, the air thick with age and insulation dust. Light filtered through a single bulb dangling from the ceiling like a forgotten thought. It smelled of old wood and summer storms, long past the kind of scent you couldn't bottle, but always remembered. Aunt Helen didn't speak as she led me to the far corner. The chest sat beneath a slanted beam, scuffed and unassuming, its brass hinges dulled with time. She knelt, pulled a small key from around her neck, worn thin on a chain that had seen more years than I had, and twisted the lock with a click that felt louder than thunder. "I should have done this sooner," she said, her voice a whisper too close to apology. Inside, layers of memories lay stacked like geological time baby shoes, report cards, photo albums. I reached past the benign and stopped at a thick envelope, my name on the front in the handwriting I hadn't seen in years. Rachel's. I opened it slowly, fingers trembling. Inside was the wedding invitation I'd mailed 5 years ago. It had never been opened. But written across the front in bold ink was a single word: return. No note. No explanation. Next, a small USB drive labeled June 2018, ceremony. Daniel had filmed it himself. The image of us beneath the arbor in that apple orchard flashed across my mind. Sunlight pouring through trees, Sophie throwing petals, the sound of our quiet vows. I clutched the drive, a lump forming in my throat. "She saw it," I said. Helen nodded. "It was mailed with a card. She watched it alone in her room. I came in later. The TV was off. Her eyes were red. And then I asked. She locked it away." Something moved beside us. Sophie, who'd crept up the stairs behind me without a sound, tugged at a corner of an old quilt. From beneath it, she pulled a plush rabbit with one floppy ear. "This one says something." She squinted, tilting the toy toward the bulb. "To first granddaughter from Grandma." My breath hitched. I turned to Helen. She was going to accept her. Helen sighed. "Until she brought it to dinner. Showed it to some cousins. They laughed. Said you were a walking cautionary tale. That's when everything changed." It hit me then, not like a slap, but like a slow drowning. My mother hadn't rejected me out of some moral code. It wasn't shame for my choices or anger over distance. It was fear. Social survival. She didn't just reject me, I said the word, scraping out of me like splinters. She buried me. A lie repeated at a dinner table becomes a family truth. Until someone flips the table. The backyard smelled of syrup and wet grass. A folding table groaned under the weight of too many quiches and not enough sincerity. Bees hovered near the marmalade, and Maggie waved them away like truth itself, annoying, persistent, and better gone. I took my seat beside Aunt Helen, who sipped her tea like it contained secrets. Rachel sat opposite Brad next to her, his shirt tucked too tightly and his smile straining at the corners. Sophie played on the grass a few yards away, her laughter ringing like wind chimes, light, sharp, and uninvited in the heavy silence of grown-up words. Maggie stabbed a slice of cantaloupe. "We're just so thrilled the family's together again. Some of us more than others," I said, tracing a finger around my coffee mug. "Remember Aunt Cassandra? She sent me a poem for my wedding. Still have it." Rachel blinked. "Cassandra. She hasn't spoken to anyone in years." Brad looked up from his plate. "Didn't she send a gift too? I remember seeing an RSVP envelope with her name." Rachel shot him a look, just a flick of lashes, but I caught it. "That's funny," I said, "because the guest book says she declined, though someone wrote a note in her handwriting." Aunt Helen cleared her throat gently. "Cassandra mailed the gift here. Your mother put it in the garage. I think it was a framed needlepoint. 'May love outrun the judgment of fools,'" I said. "I remember." The table went quiet. Brad set his fork down. "But I saw Maggie telling people Cassandra never replied. Said she'd turned bitter." I murmured. "Odd how bitterness tends to get embroidered on linen and sent with tracking." Rachel folded her napkin. "Maybe it was just easier to forget you existed." I let the silence hang. Brad looked between us. Maggie had gone, still chewing, as if the fruit had turned to chalk. Even the bees seemed to pause. I leaned forward, voice low. "Then, let me make it harder. Some people fight with fists. Others fight with files." I spread them out across the floor. Photocopies, handwritten letters, bent Polaroids, and creased envelopes. My knees ached on the hardwood as I kneeled in the center of the mess like a soldier mapping a war zone. The attic dust still clung to my sleeves, and somewhere beyond the closed door, Sophie was finally asleep. A quiet breath beneath a pink blanket in a borrowed bed. Safe for now. The laptop chimed. Daniel's face appeared in the soft blue light, his hair damp from a late shower. He looked tired but grounded like always. "I didn't expect to see that wall again," he said, noting the faded posters and shelves behind me. "Your teenage fortress." I half smiled. "It's storage now. Fitting, isn't it?" He nodded toward the piles around me. "Is that all from Chicago?" I held up the bundle of returned letters. Every one of these was meant for her. She never opened a single one. Some still have the seal. I picked up a floral envelope, Emily written in her own handwriting, shaky but careful. A pang hit deep in my chest, sharper than guilt, cleaner than regret. Daniel's voice came through gently. "They didn't respond, but you built a family anyway." I swallowed. "It still hurts. That's what makes you real." I laid down a photo, Sophie barely too wrapped in a towel, her curls sticking to her forehead. Next to it, an email printout sent, not answered. Beneath that, the baby book with her name crossed out in red ink. The red felt permanent. The door creaked. Aunt Helen stepped in with a mug of tea. Her eyes scanned the spread, then met mine. "You sure you want to stir all this up?" she asked, sitting on the edge of the bed. "I'm not the one who buried it," I said. She looked away. "If you need me, I'm here. But once you open this, you can't close it again." I clicked a file on the laptop. A voicemail. Dated 4 years ago. Mom's voice came through, clear, brittle. "Emily, I don't know what to say anymore. I hope you forget us. It might be easier that way." The silence after felt like a slap. Daniel blinked. "She never sent that." I shook my head. "She recorded it. Saved it. But never pressed send." Aunt Helen exhaled sharply. "My God." I closed the laptop, pressed my palms into the floor to steady the shaking. Then I picked up the folder and stood. Let's see if she remembers this. Memory is a weapon. And I came fully armed. The afternoon sun filtered through the latticed porch, casting golden bars across the white linen tablecloths and pastel balloon arches. A weak breeze rustled the hydrangeas lined up like obedient soldiers along the backyard fence. The smell of roast chicken and sugared tea hung in the air, deceptively pleasant. People laughed. Someone popped a plastic champagne cork. I watched Rachel beam as she accepted a crocheted pink blanket, her voice sticky with practiced gratitude. Maggie hovered behind her, all pearls and clipped nods like a queen, presiding over her favorite daughter's coronation. I held the leather-bound photo album to my chest. It was heavier than it looked, not just in weight but in consequence. When it was my turn, I stood. "I just want to say thank you." Every eye turned to me, some curious, others calculating. Rachel's frozen smile slipped a little and Maggie narrowed her gaze. I raised my glass, pretending to toast. I thought I'd bring a few memories, I continued, since this weekend's about celebrating family. The room quieted just enough. I placed the album on the center table and opened it one page at a time. There we were, Daniel and I standing under a fall canopy of burnt orange leaves, his hands cradling my face. Sophie in my arms, just a newborn. Our wedding day, 3 years ago. Not in secret, just uninvited. Gasps spread like dropped beads. Whispers bloomed. Rachel blinked rapidly. This isn't the time. Brad leaned forward, squinting at a photo. You told me they eloped quietly, that no one knew. You said she didn't want to be found. I pressed play on the small tablet propped beside the album. Daniel's voice filled the air, calm and reverent. I vowed to be the home she never had, he said on the video, looking right into the lens. And I vow to love her even when others try not to. The footage ended. No applause. Only the low rustle of discomfort. I looked at Maggie. You got the invitation. You sent it back. Still, she said nothing. Sophie is 4, I continued. She drew you pictures. She called you Grandma in letters she couldn't yet write. And you erased her before you ever knew her. Rachel pushed back from the table, her chair scraping against the wooden floor. You don't know what you're doing. I turned to her. No, you don't know what you've done. You laughed about my life like it was a joke, like love only counts if it fits your script. Rachel's lip trembled, but she didn't speak. Instead, she turned on her heel and stormed into the house. The door swung behind her, rattling the stained glass sun catcher. For a second, no one moved. Then Aunt Helen stood slow and steady. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Maggie gripped the edge of the table, her fingers white. I sat down, placed the album back in my lap, and folded my hands. No more shouting. No more begging. They remembered now. I wasn't waiting for an apology. I was waiting for acknowledgement. The rain came soft at first, just a whisper against the windows. By the time I stepped into the living room, the sky was weeping steady, each drop carving a path down the glass like time washing away what it could. The lights were dimmed, the leftover decorations sagging in the corners, pink ribbons clinging to forgotten nails. Quiet but not peaceful. The kind of quiet that waits for someone to say what no one else will. I sat alone on the couch, album still resting on my lap. My fingers traced the spine, not ready to let go, not yet. Footsteps approached slowly, heels on hardwood, sharp and hesitant. Maggie entered. Her posture was straight as always. Spine stiff with pride, arms folded like armor. But her eyes, God, her eyes carried the weight of decades now too heavy to blink away. We said nothing. She looked at me as if measuring how much of the past I still carried. I looked at her and wondered if she saw the same girl she sent away, or a woman shaped by the silence she once offered like a door slammed shut. I didn't plan this, I said quietly, the words floating between us. I just stopped hiding. Her jaw worked, clenching once before relaxing. You embarrassed your sister. She embarrassed herself, I replied. I gave her the chance to be honest. She chose performance. Maggie's gaze shifted to the side table where Aunt Helen stood, arms crossed, a small USB drive resting in her palm. Helen stepped forward. You should see this. She placed it gently on the coffee table and left the room, her absence louder than her presence had ever been. Maggie didn't move. I picked up the USB and held it between my fingers. It's everything I said. The videos, the returned invitations, the voicemail you recorded but never sent. Still nothing. You told yourself it was about protecting Rachel. I said, my voice sharper now. But it was always about you. About appearances. About avoiding shame like it was something contagious. I thought I was protecting your sister, she whispered at last. I leaned forward. No. You buried me to keep her clean. Maggie's lips parted slightly, but no words came. Her eyes shimmered, not quite tears, but something close. Regret, recognition, or just the terror of finally being seen. The doorbell rang. She blinked. Once. Then twice. I rose and crossed the room slowly, every step echoing. I opened the door. And there he was, Daniel. His coat-wet eyes locked on mine. A soft smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, steady grounding. Behind me, Maggie gasped, one hand rising to her throat. Her voice, barely audible, cracked through the stillness. "You're real." Daniel stepped inside, shook off the rain, and nodded. "Very." And with that, the silence broke. The truth has many voices. I just needed one more to echo mine. Brad arrived 5 minutes late, still in his Sunday shirt creased at the collar, eyes shadowed like he hadn't slept. The little cafe on Main was half empty, the smell of burnt espresso and vanilla syrup floating just above the hum of milk steamers. I chose a corner booth far enough from the counter that we wouldn't be overheard. He slid into the seat across from me, adjusting his sleeves like he needed something to fidget with. "Thanks for coming," I said. He nodded, cautious. "Rachel doesn't know I'm here," I assumed. I reached into my bag and pulled out a folded printout, the top half marked with a timestamp and sender. I laid it between us like a playing card I no longer needed to bluff with. He stared. The email was short, 7 lines, no signature. "Ignore her. We'll say she made it up. No one will believe her anyway. R." His mouth parted, but no sound came. "Rachel sent that to Maggie," I said, 2 weeks after Sophie was born. "She intercepted every attempt I made to reach out, convinced your mother-in-law to act like I didn't exist. You married into that silence." Brad's hands trembled as he picked up the paper. She said you left the state without a word, that you'd made some radical decision, that you didn't want anything to do with the family. Why would I send letters, gifts, photos if I didn't want connection? I asked, not angry, just tired. "I thought she was lying to protect you," he whispered, as if saying it aloud would soften its weight. I gave a humorless smile. "No, she was lying to protect herself." His eyes flicked up, meeting mine, and for the first time I saw something shift. A fracture. A fault line beginning to form. My phone buzzed on the table. "Daniel," I picked up. "I'm standing in front of the town hall," he said. "You need to come down here. Now." "What's going on?" "I have someone who wants to see you. You're not going to believe this." 20 minutes later, I walked up the stone steps of the courthouse, the same building where my parents once signed adoption papers for a niece whose name was never spoken again. The past lived in brick here, moss creeping up the sides like shame that wouldn't wash off. Daniel stood at the entrance holding an umbrella over a woman I hadn't seen in over a decade. Cassandra. She wore gray like it was armor, her hair pulled back, her eyes sharper than I remembered. Less soft, more survival. "Cassandra," I asked, voice barely holding. She smiled, tired and small. "Emily Morgan," she said. "You grew into the storm they tried to silence." My heart thundered. "Why now?" "Because they used the same playbook on me," she replied. "Maggie made me get rid of a child when I was barely 19, said I was ruining the family name. I wasn't the first she erased, but maybe you'll be the last. Control is a fragile crown. One truth, and it slips." The chairs were arranged like a tribunal. None of us knew who sat where naturally anymore. The living room, once sterile with polite family photos and dusty vases, had become a theater. And tonight, no one would leave untouched. Brad stood at the edge of the fireplace, hand on a manila envelope. He didn't speak right away. The silence, taut and trembling, did the work for him. Rachel sat upright on the love seat, arms crossed, lips pressed so tightly they were almost white. Maggie leaned against the piano, her pearls absent for the first time all weekend. I stood off to the side near Aunt Helen. Cassandra perched on a dining chair someone had pulled in from the kitchen. Her hands folded in her lap, gaze steady. Brad finally cleared his throat. "I asked everyone here tonight because I needed clarity, not just for myself, but for Sophie, for what we've let happen in this family." Rachel flinched at the name. "Some of you remember," Cassandra. Brad continued, his voice trembling. "She was my mother's best friend once." All eyes turned. Cassandra stood. "Maggie asked me to disappear," she said without ceremony. "I was 19, pregnant, and dating someone the family didn't approve of. She said I was a stain, that if I loved her, I'd take care of the problem. She didn't need to say the word. Every woman in the room heard it anyway. She paid for the clinic, gave me bus fare, told me not to come back until I could pretend nothing happened. Maggie's jaw clenched, but she didn't interrupt. And I obeyed, Cassandra said. Because I thought silence was love. She turned to Rachel. You stood beside her then, too. I remember your eyes. Rachel looked down. I thought it ended there. Cassandra finished, her voice soft. But then I saw what you did to Emily. I stepped forward now, removing my phone from my pocket. Some of you already know what's been buried, I said. But Rachel left her fingerprints. I played the recording, the one pulled from the old voicemail Daniel found in the cloud, back up an unguarded moment of cruelty. Let's just say she's a mistake. Like always, gasps scattered across the room like shattering glass. Rachel surged up. That was private. You had no right. Brad raised his hand. I had every right. He walked over and placed the envelope on her lap. Rachel opened it and froze. Divorce papers. You lied to me, Brad said quietly. You made me complicit. I was protecting us, she whispered. Mom said. Maggie finally snapped. Don't put this on me. Everyone turned. I was trying to hold this family together, Maggie barked. You think I wanted any of this? I did what I had to do. For respect. For reputation. Helen stepped forward. At what cost? Margaret. Maggie's mouth opened, but nothing came. And then I spoke. No, I said. You weren't holding a family together. You were holding it hostage. Silence. Rachel wept now, hunched over the envelope. Maggie sat down, suddenly small, and around us the room stayed still, like it too was waiting to exhale. Sometimes the crown doesn't fall. It's torn off. Willow Creek had always whispered. The grocery store aisles, the church vestibule, the hairdresser's waiting room. They all pulsed with quiet little verdicts. On Tuesday morning they hissed louder than usual. She lied to everyone, made her daughter vanish, then buried her grandchild in silence. She's not even on the church board anymore. Did you hear? She hasn't been seen since Sunday night. The air outside the Morgan home was brisk and brittle. Autumn had begun to rot at the edges, leaves blackening as if nature itself had grown tired of pretending. I stood across the street, parked beneath a thinning maple tree, Sophie dozing in her car seat behind me, her little hand curled around a toy giraffe. The shutters were closed now, the porch empty. No fresh mums in the flower pots. Just a brittle stillness hanging over the house like a punishment. Across town, I had overheard murmurs at the bakery. They didn't call her Margaret anymore. She was that woman. A pillar toppled, a name stripped of its weight. At the church, Pastor Clifton had stepped down from the pulpit mid-sermon to find Maggie's pew empty. Later, he'd stood outside her home for 10 minutes before knocking. Now he was back again, this time with a folder tucked under his arm and a weariness on his brow. He reached the porch, just as I did. He gave me a nod, solemn but kind. I said nothing. Neither did he. Maggie opened the door just enough to be seen. Her face was drawn skin, ashen hair, unkempt in a way I'd never imagined she'd allow. Her eyes met mine, and for a flicker of a second I thought I saw a tremble, but it hardened fast. What do you want? She asked, not to me, but to the pastor. I came to speak peace, he said gently, to tell you that silence isn't penance. It's just more hiding. She turned her gaze to me. I didn't speak. Instead, I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the small photo album, the one from our wedding, Sophie's birth, her first Halloween, the blurry picture of her wrapped in Daniel's jacket in the snow. I stepped forward and laid it gently at the threshold. I survived without you, I said quietly. But Sophie shouldn't have to. Her lips pressed together like she might respond, but she didn't. The door slammed shut, the echo lingering longer than the words. From the car, Sophie stirred, rubbing her eyes. Why was Grandma crying? She asked, her voice small. I swallowed. Because sometimes grown-ups have to face the truth, sweetheart. Behind me, Pastor Clifton stood for a long time, staring at the closed door. Finally, he placed a hand on the rail. You could lose everything, he whispered to the wood, except the chance to redeem yourself. Not every ending burns down the house. Some just open the windows. The cemetery lay quiet, softened by the hush of early afternoon wind and the faint rustle of leaves brushing against gravestones like old regrets. Sophie skipped ahead along the gravel path. her boots crunching softly, clutching a bouquet of orange mums wrapped in brown paper. I walked slower each step, a tug-of-war between then and now. Between the daughter I had been and the mother I had become. "This one?" Sophie asked, pointing to the third row. I nodded. "Yes, sweetheart, that's Grandpa Peter." The headstone was simple polished gray granite, his name etched beneath the years he gave and the war he'd survived. A veteran, a man of few words, and the only person in this town who ever looked at me like I wasn't some flaw stitched into the family fabric. Sophie crouched and laid the flowers down gently. Then, without prompting, she whispered, "Hi, Grandpa. Mommy said you liked books and black coffee and fixing clocks." I smiled. "That's true. He was also the first person who held you when you were born." Her eyes widened. "He did before he passed," I said softly. "He held you." And he smiled. The leaves stirred again. Somewhere beyond the rows, a crow called once and went quiet. Behind me, I heard the crunch of a slower set of steps. Daniel appeared beside me, the wind teasing the edges of his scarf. "She's stronger every time I see her," he murmured. "She's everything I never had," I replied. He nodded, pulling a folded paper from his coat pocket. "You got this too." I took the paper. It was one of our wedding photos, Daniel and I, under a tree. Sophie cradled between us, all of us, smiling like the world was whole. On the back, in a handwriting I recognized too well, were two words I remember. No apology, no explanation, just a crack in the wall. Sophie was chasing a butterfly now, her giggles catching in the wind. I turned to say something and froze. Behind the largest oak on the other side of the path stood Maggie. Her hands were bare, clasped in front of her. Her coat, usually pristine, hung loose and wrinkled. She wasn't crying, not visibly, but the tremble in her fingers, the way her eyes never quite met mine, it was all there. Sophie saw her. "Grandma," she called, halfway between joy and confusion. She took 2 steps forward before glancing at me unsure. I didn't move. I didn't call her back. But I didn't stop her either. Maggie knelt slowly as Sophie approached, her hands hovering like she didn't know whether to reach or retreat. She didn't touch, Sophie just listened as the child chattered about Grandpa Peter and butterflies and school lunches. I stepped forward slightly, but not too far. Close enough to see. Far enough not to blur the lines we'd drawn. Daniel watched all of it quietly, then slipped his hand into mine. Finally, Maggie lifted her eyes. Not quite to mine, but close. "I missed 5 years," she said, voice shaking. "I don't want to miss 6. I didn't answer. The wind picked up again, gentler this time, like it knew some things needed space to settle. I used to whisper my name like a secret. Now I say it like a truth. The kindergarten smelled like crayons and new beginnings. Wednesday sunlight spilled through the tall windows, warming the corner where Sophie was hunched over a tiny table coloring a butterfly that had somehow turned into a mermaid. Her shoes dangled above the floor, tapping a rhythm only she understood. Across from me, a receptionist clicked open a file folder and passed me a pen. "We just need the guardian names and a few emergency contacts," she said, smiling the practiced smile of someone who's processed 100 forms this week alone. I smoothed the paper. "Parent, guardian 1, Emily Carter." I paused just long enough to feel the ink settle. "Parent, guardian 2, Daniel Carter." The receptionist glanced up. "So, your husband?" I looked over at Daniel sitting a few feet away, pretending to be amused by Sophie's upside-down mermaid. He wasn't pretending very well. He looked like he could cry and laugh at the same time. I nodded. "Yes, my husband." She smiled, her pen ticking across another section. "Great. Any grandparents we should list in case of emergency?" I didn't answer right away. Sophie lifted her drawing into the air. "Mommy, can I draw Grandma next to the butterfly?" I met her eyes. "You can draw anyone you want, sweetheart. And name them too." She beamed, turning back to her art with renewed purpose. My fingers tightened slightly on the form. I had spent years letting other people rename me failure, burden, mistake. Even when I'd fought back, it was with whispers. I'd waited for permission to reclaim the life I'd built. But names only have power when you accept the ones others give you. I looked up at the receptionist. "My name is Emily Carter, and I don't apologize for it." She blinked, then smiled gently. "You don't have to." I folded the file neatly, sliding it across the table. Sophie tugged at my sleeve. Do you think Grandma will see my drawing? I brushed her hair behind her ear. Maybe. One day. The receptionist tapped her pen. So, should we list the grandmother as an emergency contact? I exhaled. Not with anger. Not with fear. Not yet, I said. But maybe soon. Outside, the bell rang for recess and the doors opened to wind and laughter. I stood and took Sophie's hand. Some endings are soft, but they still change everything. After years of silence and shadow, truth stood tall, and the voices that once erased her were left speechless. What began as a baby shower became a reckoning, a slow-burning fire that consumed the lies, one glance, one photo, one name at a time. Like the final toll of a long-hidden bell, justice didn't come early, but it came loud and it came to stay. Because when even the quietest voice dares to speak the truth, no legacy of control can withstand the echo. If this story moved, you hit like share it with someone who needs to hear it, and comment below, press 1. If you felt seen, press 2. If you'd rewrite the ending your own way.